Hello, my name is Quinlan. Welcome to the Drum Show. What was all that about? Basically, tonight I'm going to talk about the very famous, influential American composer John Cage, who's very famous for his infamous piece of music called 4:33, which is 4 minutes and 33 seconds of silence, which has been much parodied and it's been very influential. But let me get to it, okay? Basically, John Cage was born in 1912 and he passed away in 1992. Now, John Cage is famous for a couple of incredibly influential innovations in music and sound in general. Essentially, when I talk about John Cage, I should break his career up into three main periods. Okay. When he was starting out in music and all that, his teachers were Arnold Schoenberg, who was the inventor of the 12-tone serial technique, of which I will probably do a program on very shortly, seeing I'm doing classical composers at the moment. And what he did was he studied composition. He had also another famous composer as a teacher, Henry Cowell, and he was also influenced very much and also had many friends such as Lou Harrison, who's a bit of an unknown composer but still very famous in the percussive world of classical music. And he was also had a close relationship, actually they were partners, with the very famous choreographer Merce Cunningham for about 25 years, I believe. And essentially what I want to talk about with tonight's episode is actually the music of John Cage, the influence of John Cage, and the way he went about developing techniques that we use today. So essentially, as I said, there's three main periods to his work. The first period essentially evolved around the mid-1930s, okay, when he was still in his 20s at the time. And one of the most famous things that is a profound influence is the prepared piano. For a lot of people in classical music, putting nuts and bolts and rubbers and spoons and knives into piano strings is sacrilege. But yet, funnily enough, the kind of sounds that he was able to get from a piano that had screws put in the piano strings and stuff made the piano's already considered a percussion instrument, but made it very percussive. But the funny thing, that belies the fact that so much of John Cage's work in his early period is so lyrical and simply beautiful music, actually, very sparse, and in many cases quite tonal as well, which is a bit of a surprise when you first think about John Cage's most famous work, which probably came a bit later, also very controversial. So his early work, he was very interested in percussion. He played a lot of percussion. As a matter of fact, I've got a piece of music here that I was given from the Melbourne University Music Library 20-something years ago, called Amores, John Cage's Amores. I was asked to get this, to get a little percussion ensemble together for a secondary school I was teaching at about 23 years ago. And I don't think the person who gave it to me had a good look at the music, because the music in this piece of music, the music in this composition is littered with polyrhythmic 9 against 5, 7 against 6, all this polyrhythmic stuff that later on was a profound influence to people like Frank Zappa. And essentially this piece of music here, which I'm going to sort of emulate to a certain degree, as I said, was given to me. It's a legal photocopy. It was done through the school. And essentially what I'd like to do is sort of talk about Amores and this piece of music and the music that went with it. It was written in 1943, and it's the epitome of what he was doing in his first stage, in John Cage's first stage of his development. What it is, it's in 4 pieces, 4 sections I should say. It's the first section is a solo for prepared piano. The second is a trio, 9 tom-toms and a pod rattle. Well, I've got a few tom-toms, I should be able to get most of it done. Trio is the third movement, trio, 7 wood blocks, not Chinese. He makes a specification of that. And the fourth is another solo for prepared piano. Let me talk about prepared piano. The way that, or what happened with prepared piano and how that came about was essentially at that stage, John Cage was making some inroads of, like real development as a composer for his work for percussion. It was really quite, he was really doing a lot of great work, and he was becoming quite famous for it. There was a choreographer by the name of Sevilla Fort who commissioned a piece of music for her dance piece, Bacchanal. And essentially in the space where the dancers were going to dance, there was simply not enough room in the space for a percussion ensemble. With a bit of thinking, because he had a commission, he had a deadline, he got paid for it, and he had to write music for it, what was John Cage going to do? And because he was a very good pianist, and he was just thinking, forward thinking, he came up with this idea through his percussion studies and compositions, that if he actually put percussive implements like nuts and bolts and screws into the piano, onto the piano strings, that it became its own percussion area, because the only thing he could fit into this space for the dancers was a grand piano. So hence the prepared piano came, that's how it evolved, through necessity. It's very famous. When was that? 1938. And so basically that's really the start to how the prepared piano kind of came around. These days we could influence or get influence from the start of that by sampling. Okay, when you're hearing different composers sample different pieces of music, where you'll get certain sounds, but they're slowed down or sped up or whatever it might be. And that's as easy as any kind of computer program to do that these days. But back in the day, in the 1930s, John Cage came up through necessity with this thing called a prepared piano to emulate the sound of, or not even emulate, it was a percussion piece for dancers. And that's how basically the prepared piano came along.